Action research, take 15. Okay.
So I've been doing this for about an hour now, and I underestimated how awkward it'd be to present in front of a camera without anybody, so I'm going to try my best again. But this is my action research paper. I'm discussing or looking at the effects of turnover in charter schools, specifically on the impact of NWA growth. I'm going to try to get to the methodologies as quickly as possible because that's the meat and potatoes of this. But I'm going to try to just discuss a little bit about the problem and how I'm going to study it and any research that's done before that. Okay, so action research paper, take 15. So I want to study charter school turnover because it's something that's really important to me. I teach at a charter school. It's something that I think about all the time. It's no coincidence that Ryan and I did the same exact presentation because, in all honesty, it affects us and we know it affects our instruction. We just want to look a little bit more at how that affects our instruction throughout the charter school. A couple of reasons why turnover is so high in charter schools. Teachers, the characteristics of their teachers, I can go into depth in that in my thesis, but the teacher type, the school context, the urban environment, and the charter effect, which is the idea that charter schools naturally have high turnover, and this idea that the culture of turnover leads to turnover, something that's been highly researched in the charter schools. And it's significantly higher than public school turnover for these reasons. I'm going to jump through this slightly area, but this is just talking about the teacher characteristics. Younger teachers, higher the turnover. Some background information. Characteristics of the teacher, they don't have the same level of credentials, so that has a huge burden on them, cause them to leave the classroom earlier. And the charter effect, like I said, this idea that turnover is natural in charter schools, and people are in a culture of turnover and they see it kind of as a 2 or 3 year thing, and how that affects turnover, it just is a cycle. So how does this impact achievement? I wanted to test one large encompassing experiment with 3 different schools, a base score, a control group, then 2 schools that are experiencing higher levels of turnover, and see how that affects their overall achievement. What it will be based on will be a 1-year study, and it will be based on NWA scores, which is a math test score determining achievements. That will be taken at the beginning and the end of the school year and determine if those classrooms with high levels of turnover have higher levels or low levels of achievement, how that negatively impacts those schools. Okay. Some background, turnover effects, and the things that affect our instructional costs. The teachers are quality diminishes, and there's been research behind that. Financial costs, less funding for schools because they're dealing with the turnover, they haven't hired new teachers. That has an effect on their financials. And organizational costs are something I'll discuss a little more in depth after here. So instructional costs, turnover is highest amongst new teachers in the profession, where marginal gains in instruction and instructional improvement are realized more due to the lack of experience. They're losing them. The teachers are gaining the most information, they're losing them. It has a huge effect on instruction. You're just getting new teachers, and that makes sense that a new teacher doesn't know as much, or maybe doesn't have as much experience as old teachers. So these are the 2 experiments that I looked at in that regards. Financial costs, $7.3 billion spent annually to replace teachers. That financial costs, both in charter and public, have an effect on the ability to fund the school, and it definitely has an impact on the classroom too. Organizational costs, that's more to deal with the trust of teachers. Teachers don't trust each other. Teachers have a hard time. Teachers that do stay have a hard time maintaining their high level of instruction because they're dealing with new teachers, training them up. And these organizational costs, something that I would like to touch into one part of my experiment, one of the 4 sections, and I'll talk about that in my methodology section. More on the instructional aspect, the organizational aspects, high turnover, schools, instructional cohesion, and staff trust is lacked. That's by 4. And the destruction of culture, the trust between parents and teachers. When a teacher is new to the profession, it prevents that chemistry that is needed for higher instruction. 2 cases I want to touch about that research. New York had a great research study, 8,500 schools, middle schools, over 8 years. They saw both drop in math and ELA. The biggest, quote-unquote, biggest result suggests that there's a disruptive effect on turnover beyond change in distribution of teacher quality. So even more than just the distribution quality, there's an effect on the whole entire school. And then Michigan I thought was really interesting because their studies showed that there wasn't really a correlational effect, because you can't really determine something that I'll talk about a little bit in my study as well, is that high turnover might lead to poor performance, or poor performance might lead to high turnover. So that causation and correlation, that's definitely something that needs to be discussed as a limitation to understanding my experiment. I'm going to jump quickly to the methodology, because I think that's the most important aspect of this presentation. I want to do 3 different schools over a year span, with the 4th part of the experiment spanning hopefully a little further than 4 years. Look at one base school, which will be my control group, and look at their first year's NWEA scores compared to their last year's NWEA scores, and see how turnover is implemented in that, affected in that. So what I'll do is I'll break down 3 different schools, have one that has relatively historically low turnover, and 2 that do have high turnover. And in the 4 different areas, I'm going to break down so the plan will be to test all students in the middle school at levels, grades 5 through 8, and then also measure their turnover throughout the year. So turnover will be measured as teachers in the classroom first day of school, teachers in the classroom last day of school, and maintain the whole year, and that percentage would be, the amount of teachers that are left would be the turnover percentage. So about 4 different sections. I want to look at how that same grade but different schools add up. So let's say 7th grade and 7th grade. So I said I was between 5th and 8th grade. But if I look at, like, just say it's 7th grade from my control group, and 7th grade between the 2 other charter schools, how is their turnover correlated to their overall student performance over that year? So I want to break down the data in that manner, seeing if there's a turnover difference between the grades of the 2 schools. I also want to look at same school. So let's say school A, so control group A, control group B, control group C. Let's say one control group, so school A has in 7th grade 50% turnover versus 8th grade that has 90% turnover, and let's say 5th grade that has 0% turnover. How are those add up vertically? So I'll want to compare. So that'll be same school, different grades, and see how that correlation also is affected. NWEA scores being my y-axis, and my x-axis being the different grades. So that's the independent variable will be my different grades. I also want to look overall school. So like that'll hit more on the organizational effects of the turnover, right? So school A's overall turnover versus their overall student performance. Because I do believe, and I would like, if I did this research, I do believe that a school with high levels of turnover, even let's say in the 5th grade, will have an effect on the 8th grade due to that organizational effect. And then I like to have one more experiment, which would be school, so grade specific over years, right? So that'd be my leading, like the leading experiment off would be, let's see if we can maintain this experiment throughout a couple more years and see if a 5th grader at school A were having high levels of turnover his first year. His second year, the same students, to keep the student achievement as a control over time, to see, okay, first year, low levels or high levels of turnover, performance dipped. Second year, low levels of turnover, performance increased. Third year, turnover increased, and then hopefully, if my hypothesis was correct, the year after that current year, their instruction will decrease. So I'll have my 4 terms will be school specific by grade. So that's the one I just indicated. Same grade, but different schools. Okay, so same grade, 7th grade, 7th grade, 2 different schools, control group and non. Overall school comparison to see that organizational cost being implemented throughout the grades. And then school specific by grade level and by year. Which would be, this test would require analysis of achievement scores of one specific cohort at a school over a period of several years to determine the achievement of impact of the turnover. So that's the multiple year model. These four different types of experiments will then be compiled together to see, is there a correlation between student achievement and turnover. The biggest thing that I'm seeing right now as a limitation is that achievement is based on so many factors, right? So that the 4 different areas, and I think my